Hi, my name is Samuel Yoon,
My name is Sungbei Kim.
and we will be analyzing the poem Full of Life Now by Walt Whitman.
We'll go through the background info of the poem. We'll actually read the poem itself since it's relatively short. Then we'll go through the vocab, the dramatic situation, the tone, and the literary devices used in the poem. And last but not least, we'll look at the author's message for the poem.
Walt Whitman was born in 1819 and died in 1892. He was an American poet, essayist, and journalist, a humanist. He was a part of the transition between transcendentalism and realism, incorporating both views in his work.
He wrote the poem Full of Life Now in his 40s, which was around the 1950s. And the poem is a lot about how he views life, which kind of makes sense because in his 40s he was probably going through a midlife crisis. The poem is part of a book titled Leaves of Grass, and is the last poem in the Calamus group of poems. Full of Life Now by Walt Whitman. Full of life now, compact, visible. I, 40 years old, the 83rd year of the States, to one a century hence, or any number of century hence, to you yet unborn, these seeking you.
When you read these, I that was visible and become invisible. Now it is you, compact, visible, realizing my poems, seeking me. Fancy how happy you were if I could be with you and become your comrade. Be it as it I were with you, be not too certain, but I am now with you. So we will now be doing a line-by-line analysis of the poem Full of Life Now.
So he starts off with Full of Life Now, compact, visible. He's just stating how he feels so lively now that, like, in his present time, because he's alive and he's at least there.
Okay. The second line says, I, 40 years old, the 83rd year of the States, basically means that he is now 40, and the US has been in existence for 83 years.
Yeah, so overall he's just being very straightforward. And third line he says, to one a century hence, or any number of centuries hence. He is now referring to the reader of the poem and stating that him and the reader are perhaps 100 years apart, or maybe even more.
And the last line of the first stanza states, to you yet unborn, these seeking you. He's again addressing those who have not been born yet, so he's talking to those in the future who are going to read his poems.
So for the fourth line, when he says seeking you, it's important to see that it is him who is seeking the reader at this time, since he's the one that is alive. And we'll see that change later on in this poem. For the fifth line, or the second stanza, the first line of the second stanza, it says, when you read these, I that was visible and become invisible. Now he's talking about the future when he has now passed away, and the reader is the one that is now visible, which means that they're the one that is alive.
Okay, for the second line of the second stanza, it says, now it is you, compact, visible, realizing my poems, seeking me. Here, talking about he is addressing the reader by reading the poems written by Walt Whitman, is in effect seeking the author.
Right there, you see where he says seeking me. Now the reader is seeking Walt Whitman, in contrast to what was happening before, when Walt Whitman was the one that was actually going out there and trying to talk to the reader themselves. So you see that change in who's seeking the other person. And then it says, fancying how happy you were if I could be with you and become your comrade. Now he's trying to relate to what's going on in the present for the reader, and he's, by the reader reading his poem, he's in fact learning about they're learning about each other, and they have become comrades.
Okay. In the last line of the second stanza, it states, be it as if I were with you, be not too certain, but I am now with you. So basically here, he is saying that by reading this poem and by reading his work, Walt Whitman has now imparted upon the readers his ideas and his essence. So basically, by reading the entire poem he is now with us in effect because we acknowledge his work.
We'll go about it more, but then the last line basically sums up what Walt Whitman was trying to say throughout the whole poem, in that through writing, through his poem, he's able to somehow connect to the readers in the future, when in other cases he really wouldn't have been able to even talk to them or just even get to know them. So Full of Life now doesn't use that much vocab, and most of it is all about having just confusing phrases that we just need to understand. So for the first line, Walt Whitman uses visible, the word visible, and he means, when he says visible, he means that he's just alive, because he starts off by saying that he's full of life now, compact and visible. And also, the second line, he says the 83rd year of the States. He's talking about the United States and how it is their 83rd year of being established as a country. And as he talks about 1 century hence, or any number of centuries hence, he's referring to the reader and saying that him and the reader are probably at least 100 years apart.
So now for the second stanza, some confusing terms or phrases that we need to clarify on include the first line, which talks about becoming invisible. As the first stanza describes being visible as being alive, the second stanza saying invisible means that Walt Whitman is now dead, now passed on. And when he says realizing my poem seeking me in the second line of the second stanza, he just means that as certain people look for his work or actively seek after his work, they're in effect looking for Walt Whitman and his ideals that he presents. And yeah, this concludes the vocabulary and the confusing phrases of this poem.
So this being a relatively it's only 2 stanzas long, the dramatic situation actually comes in at the second stanza. When he says, "When you read these, I that was visible am become invisible." That's very dramatic, because now he's saying that he has passed on, and right after that line, he states that him and the reader can now become somewhat friends or comrades through his poems, because now the reader is able to seek him and actually understand what he was going through by reading his poems.
So for dramatic situation, we also need to consider the last line of the second stanza, which reads, "Be it as if I were with you, be not certain, but now I am now with you." This basically is saying that through reading his poems, through reading Walt Whitman's poem, although he is dead and passed on, he can still come back, and his essence is still there in his poems.
So for the tone of the poem, Walt Whitman, or at least the speaker in the poem, starts off this poem very, very straightforward. He just states that he's full of life now, compact, visible. He also just straight out tells you that he is 40 years old, and he also gives us a context. So everything is just very straightforward. But even from the start, you can notice that the way he talks, the way the speaker talks, is very choppy and short. Like for the fourth line, he says, "To you, yet unborn, these seeking you." Initially, that might be very hard to understand, but I think through that, he's saying the tone that he just wants to be very direct. He just wants to say things that are really essential for the readers to understand what he's trying to say.
For the second stanza, we need to understand that he seems much more optimistic, because now he is reflecting upon the fact that the readers read his poems and that he can have a more like a spiritual connection to the readers through them reading his poems. And by using the terms "fancying how happy you were if I could be with you and become your comrade," we can just see that he's a little bit optimistic about the future and how he can relate to his readers and how the readers can relate to him. Okay, so we're gonna now be going over some literary devices that are seen in the poem Full of Life now.
The most obvious one for us, at least, was when he says visible and invisible. That was definitely a use of euphemism, because instead of saying alive and dead, which can be more offensive, he says invisible, which implies that he can no longer be seen, which obviously means that he's just dead.
We can also look at some of the diction. For example, when he says compact, it means he's whole and alive. And when we look at the second stanza, when he says "and become your comrade," this builds a sense of like a connection between the reader and the speaker. And it's through using these words, it's through using certain diction that we can get a more holistic view of the poem and an idea of what he wants to say.
The author's message, or Walt Whitman's message through writing this, is actually very short and simple and can be related to by everyone. He talks about how in order to be remembered, he can just write a poem that allows the future readers or future generations to learn about him through his writing. Now this is very important because he probably in his mid 40s is in a midlife crisis. He probably realizes that by doing this, he's able to influence the generations to come, which is very empowering for anyone to really think about.
So, in essence, Walt Whitman is teaching us about how to leave a legacy through his works. For all writers, particularly, he is saying that through creating his works, through creating work, and through leaving some of his own character within his own poems, the reader can relate to that and, in essence, continue on his legacy and and see him for what he was, even though he's no longer there.
Yeah, we can see this message kind of play out in many different aspects of life all around us. We can see that many of the celebrities now, they always talk about living a legacy, which connects directly back to what he's saying. Except now that we're in the 21st century, it's usually more than just writing. It's actually through maybe film or some kind of sports, or maybe even music. But we see that this message that what Whitman is trying to give us is still applicable to the 21st century.
And we now know that it is effective because of the fact that we are still looking at this poem and we're still referring to popular poems from Walt Whitman. We can see that he really did impart himself in what he believed and how he was to the readers even to this day. So we can say that in terms of longevity, his message actually holds true.
Yeah, if you back in the background info, we said that he passed away in 1892, and right now it is 2016, almost 2017, and we are still looking to his poem. He has actually written a lot more than these, so he's able to essentially put his thoughts, so that us future readers can understand and read his poem, and hopefully he can influence us to just live a better life.
Okay, now we will be going over some of the some insightful questions based on the passage.
That will hopefully shine light onto the message itself.
So the first question is, who was the actually intended audience? So who is he trying to reach out to? What group and what age group specifically is he trying to reach to pass the message across?
Yeah, because usually when people try to impart their whole idea onto a future generation, usually that is meant for their children, or more directly to their children and maybe their grandchildren, great grandchildren, so that they who cannot really live next to each other, they can actually learn about their so like the children can learn about where they came from, what kind of personalities their great grandfathers had. The next question we had was, what was specifically going on in his life that caused him to write a poem like this? So overall, this is a very deep poem that talks about how he wants to influence the generations to come, And we mentioned that it can possibly be because he's going through some kind of midlife crisis since he was around that age. But that itself just can't cause someone to write a poem like this. Something has had to happen in order for him to get him to write a poem like this.
Yeah, for example, perhaps we have to look back to the time period when it was written in 1850. So, like, what specifically happened in that era that might have caused Walt Whitman to want to leave a legacy, to want to leave his name behind? The next question is, why did he specifically choose this message? Why did he want to make this so clear and want to tell the readers that he wants to leave his ideas and legacy behind for the readers to find in the future generation? So basically, why did he want to make this message the way that he did?
That kind of ties back to the question before. So overall, what got him to write such an impactful message? That, I mean, obviously it is a message that everyone can relate to, like we said before, but what got him there? Oh, and also, what did he mean by comrade? Because a comrade is someone obviously less friendlier than like some friend, but it is like a personal statement as well. So when he says, if I could be with you and become your comrade, exactly how close did he expect the reader and the writer to become?
Okay, the next question will be, how far did he hope to reach through this poem? So basically, so when he was writing this poem, he must have had an expectation to how many generations or how long in the future this may go. But like, how far exactly do you think he will go? And do you think us reading this poem now surpass his expectations for this poem? And just in general, we want to know what's the what is going on with the author when they were writing the poem, and how far do you think, how widespread would he have thought his message would have reached?
Yeah, he does mention to one a century hence or any number of centuries hence. So he does take into the idea that it could have been many centuries later on, but quite frankly, no one really could have predicted how the world would become at 2016 since so many things have changed now. So exactly how far did he expect for his writing to go?
Yeah, and how relevant would it have been even now?
There you go. Now he says, we're asking why he says full of life now. Now that he's in his 40s, usually you're in your prime time physically in your 20s, so maybe he should have said he's full of life then back in his 20s, but he does mention that he's full of life now when he's 40 years old. So perhaps he is not going through a midlife crisis. Perhaps he's maybe feeling very good with himself, and now he wants to get that good message out to the future generations. Yeah, so overall we just want to see why he states that he's full of life now, when this seems like such a message that would come from someone that is going through their midlife crisis.
Yeah, he could be saying that he has now been enlightened in a certain way, but now we ask that what could have caused that enlightenment, or what could have caused him to say this exactly. Next question would be, we're basically wondering how other poets and other authors may have reacted to this type of poem, because it is a very, like we said before, it is a very direct way of saying that you guys will remember me through reading my poem. So, and through reading other poems, we haven't really noticed this kind of message be spoken about. So we just wanted to know, like, how do you guys think that other poets and other authors might have reacted to this sort of bold statement?
Yeah, for us at least, when we read it, it was very straightforward and we got the message directly, but like it was just not a very conventional thing to do, to be so direct and to talk about the future generations to come. Also, last question, what did he mean when he says that he will now be with us as we read? Usually we would think that it just means intellectually that he is able to give us the knowledge that he had from learning through all the experience that he has gone through his life. But from the way he write it, it could mean that he's spiritual with us, and that maybe talking about some kind of spiritual connection that we and the reader and the writer could have through reading his writing.
Thank you for watching our video presentation of the poem Full of Life Now by Walt Whitman.
Hopefully you understood the message that was trying to be presented here by Walt Whitman. Also, we hope that you understand that the writing, how influential writing could be, and how influential Walt Whitman thought writing could be, and how it can reach out to future generations.
And hopefully the questions that we gave will provide a little bit more insight as you think about them. And yeah, just overall, thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching.